You've probably heard the term Proverbs 31 woman, right? And for a lot of us, it brings up this image of, well, an impossible standard for one person to meet. But what if the popular interpretation is missing the point entirely? What if it's not a checklist for a woman, but actually a blueprint for a partnership? Today, we're going to dive into the source material to construct what it calls a Proverbs 31 marriage.
So let's ask the big question. What is a Proverbs 31 marriage? The common idea is often this: superwoman who's managing everything perfectly, while her husband, well, he's just kind of there in the background. But the source materials we're looking at suggest this popular image is missing like half the picture.
And right out of the gate, the sources just completely push back on that misconception. They frame this whole thing not as a checklist for a wife, but as a blueprint for a covenant, a deep, shared agreement between two people and God.
In fact, one of our key sources uses this exact verse as its cornerstone. It sets the theme for everything else that follows. This is not about individual performance, it's about shared strength. The idea is that two people, when they're unified with God, that's the third strand, create a bond that is just incredibly resilient.
All right, so if we're building this thing, every good blueprint has to start with a rock-solid foundation, right? And according to the sources, for this marriage structure, there's really only one thing that can hold the weight of a lifetime: a shared reverence for God. Now, the texts talk a lot about the fear of the Lord, but, and this is super important, they're quick to define it not as being scared of God, but as a mutual decision to place His guidance above your own fleeting emotions, above your difficult circumstances, or even above your own self-interest. It's the ultimate anchor that keeps the ship steady for both partners, not just one.
And this verse, this is like the couple planting their flag in the ground. It's their joint statement of purpose. And notice the wording here. It's not, I will serve the Lord. It's, we will serve the Lord. That shared unity, that's the bedrock for the entire structure.
Okay, so the foundation is poured. Now what? Well, the structure needs pillars to hold everything up, and the sources point to two absolutely critical, non-negotiable supports: mutual trust and mutual honor.
And check this out. The sources make it crystal clear. The trust is a two-way street. For the wife, it says, the heart of her husband safely trusts her. But then they point to what is basically a mirror passage for the husband, emphasizing the need for a faithful man who walks in his integrity. The point is, trust is a shared covenant. He's called to be just as trustworthy as he expects her to be.
And you know, the payoff for this kind of mutual trust? It's huge, absolutely massive. When both partners are genuinely trustworthy, the sources say it just eliminates all the toxic stuff that destroys relationships: the manipulation, the secrets, the power struggles, and what you're left with is emotional safety, a space where both people can be vulnerable without being afraid.
The other pillar here is honor. And you guessed it, it's another two-way street. The sources describe a man who actually praises his wife's strength and competence, who isn't threatened by her success, but is reinforced by it. And in turn, she honors his leadership and actively protects his dignity, especially in public. It becomes this amazing cycle of mutual respect.
So, we've got our foundation, we've got our pillars, now we get to the action. How does this couple actually live day to day? Well, the sources frame this as a shared mission, not just two separate lives happening under one roof.
In this shared mission, it really comes to life in four key areas of partnership. The sources break it all down into how they work together, how they talk to each other, how they lead, and ultimately how they love. So, first up, work. The Proverbs 31 woman is incredibly industrious. I mean, she's investing, she's trading, she works hard. But the sources are quick to emphasize that her productivity is meant to support the marriage, not to compete within it. And likewise, his purposefulness is what provides stability. They're not rivals, they're partners working towards a single goal.
Okay, next up is communication, and this one is so critical. The sources get really specific here. Your tone matters, your timing matters. Kindness is the absolute rule. But, and I love this clarification, kindness does not mean silence. It means you speak the truth, but always with the goal of building the other person up, not tearing them down.
All right, but what about leadership? That's a loaded word, right? Well, the sources are really clear. This is not about domination. Biblical leadership, as they define it, means setting a direction while actively inviting input and taking responsibility. The wife isn't some silent follower. She's described as a strong partner offering essential counsel.
And you know, the glue that holds all of this together? It's sacrificial love.
The sources point to this verse from Ephesians as the ultimate standard for a husband. It's a call to love when it's inconvenient, to forgive when it's costly, and to stay when it's hard. This is the whole shebang.
Okay, but let's be real, no one is perfect. Blueprints are made for imperfect builders. So, what happens when someone messes up? When one of those pillars cracks? The sources actually include a repair plan for exactly that. And what's really interesting is that the texts don't try to sweep human failure under the rug. They ask the question directly. What happens when trust gets wounded? When one person completely fails? What do you do then? And the answer they give is this really powerful idea, choosing covenant over convenience. What this means is that when love feels strained or the relationship is just plain difficult, the commitment is to return to the original promise, the covenant, not to abandon it for whatever feels easier in the moment.
And this verse right here, this is like the engine that powers that whole repair plan. It's describing a love that endures and believes in the possibility of restoration. It's the active, gritty kind of love that makes returning to that covenant even possible.
Okay, so after all this work, the building, the partnership, the inevitable repairs, what's the final result? What does this whole thing look like when it's built? Well, the sources call it a testimony. So one of our sources actually lays this out in a fantastic summary table. It shows the direct cause and effect of their partnership. For example, it says when her faith is God-centered and his is God-led, the outcome is spiritual unity. Or when her words are wise and kind and his are affirming and full of praise, the outcome is emotional safety. It's a really clear model of how it all interacts.
So let's just boil this all down. The big takeaway here, this is not about a perfect superwoman or some kind of dominant man. It is about a strong, competent woman and a faithful, responsible man building their entire life on a shared reverence for God.
And it all wraps up with this one last, really thought-provoking question. Instead of asking, who's in charge or who's doing more, the couple building according to this blueprint is focused on a shared journey. They're constantly asking one thing together: where is God taking us? And that frames the entire marriage as a forward-looking mission. According to these texts, that's the whole point.